Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global Market Intelligence podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Technology, Media, and Telecom at S&P Global Market Intelligence. And today, we're going to be talking about the RSA Security Conference that's coming up. And to preview what we're expecting there, I have returning guests, Scott Crawford and Dan Kennedy. Gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Eric. Always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, glad to be back. I think it's my fifth time, so I'm looking forward to getting the five-timers jacket in the mail after we record.
Yeah. Actually, I'm thinking more, sort of the merit badge style, something you could sew on.
I'll take what I can get. Yeah.
Maybe it's a tie tack.
He lettered in podcasting.
You'd have to think of something that's maybe security themed. Well, we'll see. But that aside, RSA, it's the big, massive security conference that, of course, has taken on a life of its own for a long time. There's a lot that's going on there, but I guess maybe let's start with just a little bit of background on the conference itself and what you're going to be looking for this year.
I'll jump in on that. I mean, it's not the practitioner focused or threat research focused, although there is that content there, but it doesn't have that reputation as much as it is probably one of the premier conferences about the business of cybersecurity. And, there's pros and cons with that as well, too. We've spoken to a number of practitioners who feel very sold at RSA. But on the other hand, it's still one of the better places to be exposed to early stage companies. It's definitely an exposure to the business of cybersecurity and the companies that are in it. And it does do a pretty fair job of showcasing innovation, perhaps not the earliest stage, which can be, it can be really tough to discern value and differentiation in very early stage companies. But those who have begun to gain some traction, they do make an appearance at RSA. It is an opportunity to get exposed to them. So that's one of the things I really like about it.
I mean, it is a gathering of security clan because I don't remember the numbers last year. Attendees were in the 20,000, something like that, if I remember right.
I think it was. I think it actually pushed over 30 last year. It was high. It was one of the higher attended conferences, which was remarkable considering, during the pandemic, how attendance didn't exist. It was all virtual in 2021.
But it is one of those things where if you think about the density of folks there, and I guess you were talking about practitioners, you can contrast that with something like Black Hat and DEFCON, in which they're much more focused on the actual technology of security, a lot of the threat environment, threat research, those kinds of things. Certainly the program at RSA has a lot of that content, but not necessarily the primary focus.
Yeah. And again, to get exposure to what is emerging in the market, to meet and greet, have those relationships with people in the business of cybersecurity, for being exposed to the business of cybersecurity, it's one of the conferences that a lot of vendors and a fair number of practitioners see as must see. And like you were saying, Eric, it really is a gathering of the clan. And I just took a look. It said actually approximately 40,000 attendees last year, according to the conference itself.
Oh, okay. All right. No, there you go. Yeah, significant numbers. And I guess the interesting thing when you start looking at where those folks are, I mean, so the event gets laid out with, there is that upfront sort of early exposure, the innovation sandbox that's on Monday that takes a look at early stage companies. But that especially those that are out on the show floor are those that are maybe a little further along in terms of where things are going.
Yeah. And again, that's, part of the thing about the conference is that it is considered in the business one of those must attend events, must have a presence at events. But there's pros and cons to that. The conference organizers obviously being aware of this, they're aware that exhibiting does have a premium attached to it. And, we do see some vendors not always, I don't know I'd say balking at that necessarily, but just case in point, one of the largest vendors in cybersecurity, Palo Alto Networks, does not have a booth on the expo floor this year. So that's, I haven't heard any, official line on that from Palo Alto, but one would speculate that being in the expo is a question of bang for the buck. So if someone is not appearing at the expo at that scale of competitor, then you have to kind of question, it's either the bang or the buck. There's not enough bang for the buck, or the buck itself is getting pretty high. So yeah, there's some question now as far as the value of having that presence on the show floor versus the perception that it's a must-attend event.
Yeah, it's difficult to evaluate just because you have tactical evaluations, number of badges scanned, qualified leads, whatever it is. So counting metrics. But then you do have that market signal sort of sent when you aren't there and your competitors are. You're taking any individual company out of it because there have been past examples of folks who have also, had a large boost base and then not invested in it in another year. So it's interesting how companies sort of make these evaluations around it's a tremendous marketing expense. So, but not attending does raise questions. So it's always an interesting spot.
Well, and we've got a good crew out there, this year as forever. But it's always my measure is where are a lot of our meetings taking place? Because to your point, we do get into situations in which a lot of the meetings wind up happening off the exhibit floor. There are a lot that are actually located in the various hotels. There are a lot of folks who are having events, Marriott, for example, meeting rooms at the W or the St. Regis, the Intercontinental. That's always sort of my measure of where's that taking place and who's on the show floor and who's not.
You almost now have like the first ring of hotels and meeting rooms, and then and then outer rings of hotels and meeting rooms, and then
ring zero,
and then just a nod to San Francisco itself. There is a ring of police presence around Moscone, and so there are meetings within that and outside of that, and there's a lot of layers to this at this point. RSA is almost like a platform, if you will, with a lot of adjacent parts in its gravity.
Yeah, well, and of course, we'll be back at America's Growth Capital's cybersecurity conference again this year. They've moved a little further outside that ring, moving up to the 7th now, I guess, for the Hibernia. But interesting to see how these dynamics all influence and play out.
Yeah, conference sprawl. That's it. I don't know if that's necessarily unique. I doubt it, frankly, to the RSA conference. A large enough conference that attracts that many attendees is likely to geographically spread out anyway, but it seems like it's increasing with the RSA conference.
Yeah, it's just an interesting, because of where it is in San Francisco. So if you think about Vegas, you can get a few more conference rooms, but it's a very different expansion. Whereas in RSA and, a little peek into the life of an analyst, it's like, okay, this meeting's going to be at a restaurant we've taken over. Okay, this meeting's a hotel up the street. Okay, this is a workspace that we've rented. And it's just a nod to having a conference in a city versus more common venue like I mentioned Vegas and Black Hat and DEFCON, but the same kind of thing where you can't take over the next casino because they've got their own conference going on about some other topic. I believe it was pet food a couple of years ago.
There's a juxtaposition: pet food and threat research.
Don't think I've heard that comparison made before.
As conference goers, we tend to intermingle with other conference attendees, and so you get some interesting cross-industry discussions going on the casino floor sometimes after the festivities.
I didn't get any pet food samples last time I was at RSA.
I did not. Cheated. I got a lot of complaints from the pet food people in Vegas about the security people. Apparently they were demonstrating too many mobile attacks and stuff like that to them. Stuff they weren't interested in.
Now, we do talk in technology about eating one's own dog food, so who knows?
He'll be here all week, folks. Actually, he will be here all week.
Strangely enough. Well, with all that in mind, I guess that next question is, what are those key themes? What are we looking for? And the trends that we're looking at and where that's headed. We talked a little bit about maybe RSA becoming a platform into and of itself. And we've all been talking about the shift, or at least the idea about shifting to security platforms. There's a lot that's going on. What are you all going to be looking for? And what are we looking closely at?
The theme this year is, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the art of the possible. Every time I hear it, I think of the longtime CEO of RSA, Art Coviello, I think. Just kept popping into my head. But the next line of the theme was, decisions are not all binary. So 0 or 1s. And I thought that was an interesting line because there is this theme of risk prioritization, a long-held topic within security, but I'm starting to see vendor platforms actually apply this in fairly meaningful ways. So it's rating risks. Okay, this risk is a 7, this application security issue we found, let's say on a WAF. Is that something you want to block? Is that something you want to alert on? Is that just an informational thing you want reported somewhere? And so there's a fairly serious nod to this desire for preventative controls, but now based on much more complex prioritization. And then the second piece of prioritization is this idea that we're using actual context rather than, let's say, CVE ratings or something like that. So the context of the environment. So I noticed in the innovation sandbox, for example, there's at least one contestant where they're looking at vulnerabilities that are exploited in the wild and comparing them to the vulnerabilities the scanner detected. So, giving you a more meaningful prioritization. So I'm seeing that theme play out, and I thought it sort of fit with the RSA theme that, these are not all off-on decisions anymore. There's a little more complexity to them in the platforms.
Practitioners have for a long time tried to come to a more objective and rational way to evaluate their priorities and the actions that they do take, given the fact that their availability and bandwidth for that is always limited. I think one of the things, we'd heard some talk about, security spending fatigue over the course of the last few months. And kind of what that represents is organizations continue to spend on cybersecurity, and yet they still are attacked. Well, that kind of overlooks partly the nature of the business itself, which is, adversaries are always motivated to circumvent effective defense, and vice versa. Defenders have to respond. So that's an ongoing issue as I see it. But as the attack surface itself continues to grow and become more diverse, as attackers likewise become, more diverse in just their sheer number and variety of how they target organizations, the information generated in order to keep a handle on all this has become so overwhelming that, and Dan, you saw this in our security operations survey last year. We've been asking the question year over year on an average day, and Dan, correct me if I'm getting the wording of this wrong or not, but on an average day, how many alerts are you unable to investigate on a typical day? And on average, that number went over 50% for the first time this year that we've been asking that question, which speaks to the fact that, this technology sprawl, proliferation of attacks, the generation of information to track all that has gone to a point where one of the things I think we've just been reluctant to acknowledge, particularly in the product space, is that cybersecurity has gone beyond being a human scale problem, meaning a problem that humans alone can solve just based on the sheer number of inputs alone. So, no surprise to anyone, as it was last year, AI, our title for our write-up of the conference last year was AI Everywhere All at Once. And I expect that to continue this year, particularly considering how many cybersecurity vendors have introduced their own generative AI assistants, for example.
Yeah, that's like the most damning number in our Voice of the Enterprise Information Security Survey.
Yeah.
I won't even take credit for coming up with that question the way it is. I was struggling with how to get at the gap in alerting. And I remember our brilliant colleague, Mike Roble, said, just ask them how many they're getting that they're not looking at.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, you just made, typical to our surveys. I had about 5 questions trying to get at a point. He was able to turn it into 1, which I appreciated. But yeah, so that's 50% of known alerts where there's a priority that they think they should be looking at it. And they're just saying from a person power standpoint, we're not getting to it.
Yeah.
And so in my head, I just have like that scene from Die Hard 2 where all the trucks of gold are just driving through New York and nobody's noticing. And those are the known knowns. So, you have your known knowns you investigate, your known unknowns you're not able to investigate. And there's still a third category of things that the scanners aren't picking up or the detection is not picking up. It's a scary situation. I remember I went on a little bit of a rant at the end of our RSA breakfast last year in response to a question around that. And it was around how generative AI may benefit SecOps. And I kind of said, before I want to hear about labor savings or, spending less on the SOC, I want to hear that we're getting at that 50%. That's a practical answer practitioners need. We're saying we're investigating half what we think we should be. How do we make that 75%, 80%, 100%? And so that's where some of these, SecOps automation and generative AI integrations, that's where they'll have the greatest benefit. So leaping ahead to talking about other things like, you won't even have to have people in your SOC. It's like, that's not a great sales position to take, I think, at this point.
and still a ways from that. But the problem is, I think, as we've discussed on previous episodes, we've had AI capabilities for a while, and we've thrown a lot of AI, whether or not that's neural analysis, machine learning, take your pick, and addressed, at least attempted to address some of those concerns. And yet here we are at this 50% number.
Well, the techniques have, they've been limited in their ability to, I hate to use words like draw conclusions because that sounds so anthropomorphic, but to be able to take action based on inputs through logic that facilitates effective action. There's still so much human involvement in that. There's an awful lot that can be done to recognize things that are pretty readily recognized as anomalies or behavioral artifacts that can be distinguished as being frankly malicious. But pulling that volume together and pulling together the context in that to, be able to elaborate the context in such a way that machines can actually deal with it, that is something that's more recently come into view, at least conceptually, with the idea of generative AI. I think there's no question that people perceive the potential for that technology going forward. But the question is, will we have confidence in it, or can we? And what are the benchmarks, either frank and quantitative, which I doubt, that sounds realistic today, but what can we rely upon to say that this is something that we can have confidence in going forward? And to some extent, we kind of saw the same sort of thing with the early adoption of cloud computing as well, too. There was concern over the exposure of data that's exposed to a third party, functionality, and so on. We've come to a point where, the industry as a whole is certainly comfortable enough with the concept to have it be so prevalent in technology. I expect something of the same will happen with the adoption of AI as it evolves from what we know as generative AI today to where it's going in the future. Does that necessarily mean the autonomous SOC, as some people call it, will necessarily see the light of day? Incrementally, in stages, incomplete. Who was it, Eric, said that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed?
Oh dear.
Sorry, put you on the spot.
No. It's the author of Cybercrash.
Oh, yeah.
Sci-fi perspectives, yes. The future is here, just not evenly distributed.
I would throw in from a practical perspective, implementing machine learning, via products is the number 2 pain point in our recent survey among security leaders. 17% saying that's probably their top pain point this year, following the number 1, which is cloud security at 18%. So prevalent, but a number of challenges emerging according to the security leadership we talked to in the user space.
Yeah, interesting. Just challenges getting it to work right.
Yeah, and the fact that it's already able to generate code, it's already to perform automation. We should expect that we'll see more of that, see more capable functionality as the next generation of transformers is changed. But having confidence in what it can do and its output is one thing. Having confidence in the functionality itself and its own protections against exploit and mitigations of risk, that's the other aspect of AI that we see. There's the application of AI for security, in other words. There's the security of AI itself. So both sides of that coin, we expect to see even further elaboration of both of those at RSA.
And the security for AI comes up a couple times in the innovation sandbox, interestingly.
Yeah.
One vendor's detection of AI-generated content, another's AI visibility via data control, and then one was data permissions and LLMs. So that's all security for AI you're talking about. And it's interesting, so let's talk about pain points. Generative AI is at the top, and it speaks to the use of generative AI in the enterprise outside of security. So we talked about the SOC use case, but you also mentioned securing everybody's use of generative AI, all these data concerns. And it seems to be something that a number of CISOs are getting asked about because it went from off chart to a top pain point, which is kind of unusual in my both studies to see something jump that high in a year.
And it's affecting all of us, in our coverage here at S&P. Many participants in data security, privacy, and governance. So that complicates things as far as management goes. Justin Lamb and Paige Bartley both keeping an eye on those aspects. Identity and access management, data controls on access to and use of generative AI and well beyond under Garrett Becker's coverage. security for the platforms themselves, typically hosted in the cloud, so cloud native application protection. Intersections there with Mark Ayer and his coverage of security operations as well. You, Eric, of course, in your coverage of the security of cloud infrastructure, modern IT infrastructure more generally. There's almost nothing that it doesn't touch, and it's related to many other things that we cover. So we expect to see a lot of these intersections at RSA.
The detect AI generated content is one of the most interesting ones to me. There's a lot of speculation about attackers using it in phishing attacks, and we've seen some real examples. Eric, you didn't attack anybody, but you kind of a neat, you did a neat podcast where it was generated content and your voice generated.
I attacked myself.
Yeah, and we've seen a couple real examples of that happening in the wild, where it was used to, I guess, impersonate a CEO or something. But that to me seems like the most back and forth battle there will be. The idea that generative AI is going to keep getting better. And then the platforms that attempt to detect its usage are going to have to keep improving. And then there's going to be a real battle there over the next couple of years.
And a lot of questions about where that winds up going. I mean, you've got the major generative platform providers identifying that they're going to go mark their content in some way. And then there's that question of, can you detect the marked content? Is there content there that is not marked? Starts to get into some really tricky waters.
Well, also just being ready for the adoption of this next stage of technological evolution. Are organizations really prepared for it? Are their practices mature enough to really make the most of the opportunity? And that kind of gets into another area, Dan, you kind of alluded to this with talking about RSA as a platform, but the P word has gotten to be quite a thing in cybersecurity. There's a number of vendors that are advocating their own approach to a cybersecurity platform that incorporates multiple functionalities. Not coincidentally, a lot of those who are making the biggest investments in generative AI and what AI will become are also in that same sphere of being platform providers themselves. So, our organization's ready for it. And as far as the platforms themselves go, we don't really see yet one ring to rule them all. The platforms tend to be, again, something else where the future is here is just unevenly distributed, which is William Gibson, I did find out while we were chatting away.
It is indeed. I was crossing him up with Neil Stevenson on the snow crash side, but yep, absolutely.
I wasn't going to venture a bad guess. I do that often enough as it is. But on the one hand, there's advantages to working with a platform, single provider that is behooved to make things integrate well, function together well. But do they always provide exactly the sort of functionality that the enterprise, that the business needs? Businesses want to be decoupled from being bound to a certain provider for one reason or another. They're worried about lock-in with those approaches. And at the same time, there's a lot they get out of those approaches that streamlines the adoption of security in ways that they might not be able to otherwise. So, yeah, the platform discussion itself has got to be interesting.
Well, I'll make the point that we've seen this before. And if you take a look, that the problem, of course, is that we've got all these different tools from a security perspective, all generating lots of data about what they're individually seeing. And so we need to pull this all together in some way that's going to help us make sense of it. And how long ago was the first wave of security information event management, SIMSAM systems out there?
Yeah.
Turned out it was a really complicated thing to get right.
Yeah.
And the question, of course, is, the ideal is that if, especially as we get towards AI, if we can get towards an environment in which we can bring all this information together, generative AI gets to go feed on the data. We need to have all the data in one place. So a platform is the thing that helps to bring all this stuff together. Where do we go with that? Are there other ways to bring all that data together?
Yeah, and there definitely are. We've seen a couple of alternative approaches to that. Our philosophy about that for an organization that's integrating its own stack is that they may be decoupled. So storage of one provider may be used to facilitate the analytics of another. You may want to perform data movement, ETL functions at what is sometimes called the data fabric layer. Increasingly, I've heard that in the last several months.
Right. Well, now data fabrics for AI environments to bring this together. We've got a number of folks who are providing the fabric into things. Actually, we're just spending some time with the integrated provider who's looking to do that from a managed service perspective. Comcast is doing it, amongst others. Yeah.
And then you have the federated approach, which is, leave your resources in situ as they are. can be very expensive to move data around. So tap into the solutions that you have. Solutions might be overreaching a little bit in some cases, but tap into the tools deployed that you have and make use of those in terms of correlation and context. So yeah, there are a number of trends that are remaking the field. But you mentioned the early days of SIM, and one of the motivating factors there was that the security tools of that generation were throwing off a lot of information. And I know you know something about this from your past with intrusion detection.
Yeah, I got a few scars that I picked up along the way.
And that kind of, kicked the SIM segment into being. And similar sort of thing today with this very disturbing number from our survey data that shows that organizations don't get to half or more of the events they see in a typical day. So yeah, these are the things that are spurring innovation in this field. And again, this is one of the areas where we expect to see trends emerging at RSA.
This is a Groundhog Day debate, though. While you were talking, I was thinking about a decade ago at our RSA breakfast where I just asked the room full of vendors, how many dashboards are we supposed to look at? Because we had dashboarditis at the time, which is another function of this. And the remark was a mistake because I had, dozens explain to me why they were going to be the dashboard to rule them all, the single pane of glass. And we even asked that question back in the survey on behalf of a large provider. You know, is the ability to, and again, dashboard, but is the ability to dashboard and integrate 5 or 6 tools going to cause you to go platform versus best of breed? Security people are interesting. I mean, they always sort of tip towards best of breed, but then there's a large, but it depends. And you see functions commoditize over time or functions that are best bundled a certain way. I mean, SASE as a proxy really took off during COVID because it was the idea that, hey, we're not all accessing from an office network anymore. We need some points of control. And there's a lot of things we can do in that point of control that would make sense to have together. We're talking about SIM. We see products that really seem like features or capabilities of another product. And so I'm thinking about, playbooks, automated playbooks, for example. Almost as soon as they came out, it was like, well, this make a lot of sense as part of a SIM platform. UEBA, behavioral analytics, becomes rather than a product, a component of a lot of different things. SIM data, DLP, wherever you want to apply it to identify patterns. So yeah, it's interesting. The sort of best of breed versus platform debate is a lot more complicated historically than people sort of give it credit for. But security people, historically, they're always looking for solutions to novel problems. So, we saw it comparing the network study to the security study years ago. The network folks, there was, lock-in wasn't necessarily a terrible thing. And there was a lot of training on some of those network platforms. And they wanted availability. So safe, reliable platforms were where they went. The security folks were always kind of looking to solve something novel. And we're talking about, securing generative AI usage right now. And so, it's interesting the direction they go.
And things are starting to integrate together as well, too. So we're starting to see the behavioral analytics starting to factor into things like email security. And that makes sense because, that's one of the points where people and technology have the most interaction. So, and that in turn has given rise to this greater emphasis on tools to understand human behavior in interacting with technology. And again, another center of gravity for, platforms that deal with email security, starting to integrate that functionality as well as security awareness and training and new approaches to that.
Well, and that brings us full circle into the AI detection thing of it's like, it's not only is it human, are we detecting human behavior, it's are we detecting non-human behavior?
Right.
Well, man, we've clearly got a lot to chase down at RSA this year.
Yeah, it's always a hoot. You try and maintain your professional curmudgeonliness and be objective about the opportunity versus, the downsides of such a big conference like that. But you see people you don't see any other time of year, maybe once or twice any other time of year. You're exposed to more than you can be exposed to in a short period of time about the business itself. So it's always worthwhile for us. And we always enjoy seeing our friends and people we know there and look forward to seeing as many of you who are listening today as we can.
Dig us up when you're out there. Well, and of course, we'll be doing a live update from RSA as well to get the quick hits and everything that's going on. But hopefully people will listen in then. Well, it has been great having both of you back. We'll see what we see when we get to San Francisco.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks for the opportunity. Always enjoy it.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. And I'll be looking in the mail for my merit badge.
All right. I got to work on a design for these. Very definitely. Now that we've gotten enough returning guests, we got to get something on there. Well, that is it for this episode of Next in Tech with or without merit badges. Thanks to our audience for staying with us. And thanks to our production team, including Carolyn Wright, Sophie Carr, Kate Asplund, and Caitlin Buckley on the marketing and events teams, and our agency partner, the 199. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, where we're actually looking at another conference, the National Association of Broadcasters. I hope you'll join us then, because there is always something next in tech.